All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, and see what further misadventures our plucky protagonist can find himself in today. Welcome back. This is our 5th night of reading from Cervantes' Don Quixote. We've had a lot of ups and downs through the last few nights, partly because, well, the additional drama of myself nearly dying on stream on Sunday. Well, I'm feeling somewhat recovered by my own misadventures, so we should be ready to get through tonight's session without as much hacking and wheezing. Yeah, I feel much better. Most of the medicine fogginess has lifted. I'm upright, which is, being vertical is the goal most of the time. And I can get through about 3/4 of a breath without hacking up a lung. So, we're getting there. I will take these small personal wins. Speaking of personal wins, last time, Sancho managed to not quite shit himself. Small victories. Never mind that he was clinging to Don Quixote's leg and made a little bit of a noise. But, little things. Details. So, we're going to continue to see more of this dynamic duo in action tonight, I'm sure, because it just keeps giving. These two are awful to each other, but in a sort of heartfelt way that I actually enjoy. This is a better sort of hating relationship than we saw when we read, like, Wuthering Heights and stuff, where it's just hate everywhere, with some interspersed other feelings that are confusion, but really they're just hate. This is, for the most part, well-meaning, and they're just bad with each other. It was, between the GI distress and straight up Don Quixote spewing his guts over Sancho's face, which in turn obviously resulted in a return. These guys are early pioneers of physical humor. Dumb and Dumber ain't got nothing on this. Oh god, have you been seeing trailers for that? I am sorry. I hate so much that Wuthering Heights is praised as like the height of romantic fiction when it's just, they're trying to make it a romance, and it's not. It is anything but. The only thing romantic about it is the fact that it has an ending. There's so many better options for something from the Bronte sisters if you want romance. Not Wuthering Heights. Please, no. I had an ex who, it was her favorite book, which should have told me a number of things, but I hadn't read it yet until we had started seeing each other. And then I did read it, and the relationship didn't quite last that long, actually. Huh. That tells me many things. Yep. Alright, guys. So, with that little bit of existential torment out of the way, let's go ahead and get back to our reading, and we'll see what we have to get up to tonight. So, let's switch back to our reading screen and get back to the book. So, Don Quixote, Chapter 21, which treats of the exalted adventure and rich prize of Mambrino's helmet, together with other things that happened to our invincible knight. Yeah, I wouldn't call it a red flag. Reading any book doesn't count as a red flag for me. Well, unless it's like Mein Kampf, that's a red flag. But Like, reading in general, that's like slightly better than neutral. Now, your selection might drag it back down to true neutral, but it's generally to the good. Alright, I'm going to derail myself even more. It now began to rain a little, and Sancho was going into the fulling mills. But Don Quixote had taken such an abhorrence to them on account of the late joke that he would not enter them on any account. So, turning aside to right, they came upon another road, different from that which they had taken the night before. Shortly afterwards, Don Quixote perceived a man on horseback, who wore on his head something that shone like gold. And the moment he saw him, he turned to Sancho and said, "I think, Sancho, there is no proverb that is not true, all being maxims drawn from experience itself, the mother of all sciences, especially that one that says, where one door shuts, another opens. I say so because if last night fortune shut the door of the adventure we were looking for against us, cheating us with the fulling mills, it now opens wide another one, for another better and more certain adventure. And if I do not contrive to enter it, it will be my own fault, and I cannot lay it to my ignorance of fulling mills or the darkness of the night. I say this because, if I mistake not, there comes towards us one who wears on his head the helmet of Mambrino, concerning which I took the oath thou rememberest." "Mind what you say, your worship, and still more what you do," said Sancho, "for I don't want any more fulling mills to finish off pulling and knocking all senses out." "The devil take thee, man," said Don Quixote. "What has a helmet to do with fulling mills?" "I don't know," replied Sancho, "but faith, if I might speak as I used, perhaps I could give such reasons that your worship would see you were mistaken in what you say." "How can I be mistaken in what I say, unbelieving traitor?" returned Don Quixote. "Tell me, seest thou not yonder knight coming towards us on a dappled grey steed, who has upon his head a helmet of gold?" "What I see and make out," answered Sancho, "is only a man on a grey ass, like my own, who has something that shines on his head." "Well, that is the helmet of Mambrino," said Don Quixote. "Stand to one side and leave me alone with him. Thou shalt see how, without saying a word to save time, I shall bring this adventure to an issue, and possess myself of the helmet I have so longed for." "I will take care to stand aside," said Sancho. "But God grant, I say once more, that it may be martyrdom, and not fulling mills." "I have told thee, brother, on no account to mention those fulling mills to me again," said Don Quixote, "or I vow, and I say no more, I'll full the soul out of you." Sancho held his peace, in dread lest his master should carry out the vow he had hurled like a bowl at him. The fact of the matter, as regards the helmet, steed, and knight that Don Quixote saw, was this. In the neighborhood there were two villages, one of them so small that it had neither the apothecary's shop nor barber, which the other that was close to it had. So the barber of the larger served the smaller, and in it there was a sick man who required to be bled, and another man who wanted to be shaved. And on this errand the barber was going, carrying with him a brass basin. But as luck would have it, as he was on the way, it began to rain, and so, not to spoil his hat, which probably was a new one, he put the basin on his head. And, being clean, it glittered at half a league's distance. He rode upon a grey ass, as Sancho said, and this was what made it seem to Don Quixote to be a dappled grey steed, and a knight, and a golden helmet. For everything he saw he made to fall in with his crazy chivalry and ill-errant notions. And when he saw the poor knight draw near, without entering into any parley with him, at Rocinante's top speed he bore down upon him with the pike pointed low, fully determined to run him through and through. And, As he reached him, without checking the fury of his charge, he cried to him, "Defend thyself, miserable being, or yield me of thine own accord that which is so reasonably my due." The barber, who, without any expectation or apprehension of it, saw this apparition coming down upon him, had no other way of saving himself from the stroke of the lance but to let himself fall off his ass. And no sooner had he touched the ground than he sprang up more nimbly than a deer and sped away across the plain faster than the wind. He left the basin on the ground, with which Don Quixote contented himself, saying that the pagan had shown his discretion and imitated the beaver, which, finding itself pressed by the hunters, and bites and cuts off with its teeth that for which, by its natural instinct, it knows it is pursued. He told Sancho to pick up the helmet, and he, taking it in his hands, said, "By God, the basin is a good one, and worth a real of 8, if it is worth a maravedis," and handed it to his master, who immediately put it on his head, turning it round, now this way, now that, in search of a fitment, and, not finding it, he said, "Clearly the pagan to whose measure this famous headpiece was first forged must have been a very large head, but the worst of it is half of it is wanting." Okay, yeah, the Don Quixote voice does still tickle the throat, but we should be fine. I have too much fun with that voice to not do it. When Sancho heard him call the basin a headpiece, he was unable to restrain his laughter, but, remembering his master's wrath, he checked himself in the midst of it. "What art thou laughing at, Sancho?" said Don Quixote. "I am laughing," said he, "to think of the great head the pagan must have had who owned this helmet, for it looks exactly like a regular barber's basin." "Dost thou know what I suspect, Sancho?" said Don Quixote, "that this wonderful piece of this enchanted helmet must, by some strange accident, have come into the hands of someone who was unable to recognize or realize its value, and who, not knowing what he did, and seeing it to be of the purest gold, must have melted down one half for the sake of what it might be worth, and of the other made this, which is like a barber's basin, as thou sayest. But be it as it may, to me who recognize it, its transformation makes no difference. For I will set it to rights at the first village where there is a blacksmith, and in such style that the helmet the god of smithies forged for the god of battles shall not surpass it, or even come up to it, and in the meantime I will wear it as well as I can, for something is better than nothing, all the more as it will be quite enough to protect me from any chance blow of a stone." "That is," said Sancho, "if it is not shot with a sling, as they were in the battle of the two armies, when they signed the cross on your worship's grinders, and smashed the flask with that blessed draught that made me vomit my bowels up." "It does not grieve me much to have lost it," said Don Quixote, "for thou knowest, Sancho, that I have the receipt in my memory." "So have I," answered Sancho, "but if I ever make it, or try it as long as I live, may this be my last hour. Moreover, I have no intention of putting myself in the way of wanting it, for I mean with all my 5 senses to keep myself from being wounded, or from wounding anyone. As to being blanketed, again I say nothing, for it is hard to prevent mishaps of that sort. And if they come, there is nothing for it but to squeeze our shoulders together, hold our breath, shut our eyes, and let ourselves go where luck and the blanket may send us." "Thou art a bad Christian, Sancho," said Don Quixote on hearing this. "For once an injury has been done thee, thou never forgettest it. But know that it is the part of noble and generous hearts not to attach importance to trifles. What lame leg hast thou got by it, what broken rib, what cracked head, that thou canst not forget that jest? For jest and sport it was, properly regarded, and had I not seen it in that light, I would have returned and done more mischief in revenging thee than the Greeks did for the rape of Helen, who, if she were alive now, or if my Dulcinea had lived then, might depend upon it, she would not be so famous for her beauty as she is." And here he heaved a sigh and sent it aloft, and said, Sancho, let it pass for a jest, as it cannot be revenged in earnest. But I know what sort of jest and earnest it was, and I know it will never be rubbed out of my memory any more than off my shoulders. But putting that aside, will your worship tell me, what are we to do with this dappled grey steed that looks like a grey ass, which that Martino that your worship overthrew has left deserted here? For, from the way he took to his heels and bolted, he is not likely ever to come back for it. And by my beard, but the grey is a good one.
I have never been in the habit, said Don Quixote, of taking spoil from those whom I vanquish. Nor is it the practice of chivalry to take away their horses and leave them to go on foot, unless indeed it be that the victor have lost his own in the combat, in which case it is lawful to take that of the vanquished as a thing won in lawful war. Therefore, Sancho, leave this horse, or ass, or whatever thou wilt have it be, for when its owner sees us gone hence, he will come back for it.
God knows I should like to take it, returned Sancho, or at least to change it for my own, which does not seem to me as good a one. Verily, the laws of chivalry are strict, since they cannot be stretched to let one ass be changed for another. I should like to know if I might at least change trappings.
On that head, I am not quite certain, answered Don Quixote, and the matter being doubtful, pending better information, I say thou mayest change them, if so be thou hast urgent need of them.
So urgent it is it? Answered Sancho, that if they were for my own person, I could not want them more. And forthwith, fortified by this license, he effected the mutatio caparum, and rigged out his beast to the 99s, and making quite another thing of it. This done, they broke their fast on the remains of the spoils of war plundered from the sumpter mule, and drank of the brook that followed from the fulling mills, without casting a look in that direction. In such loathing did they hold them for the alarm they had caused them. And all anger and gloom removed, they mounted, and without taking any fixed road, not to fix upon any being the proper thing for true knights errant, they set out, guided by Rocinante's will, which carried along with it that of his master, not to say that of the ass, which always followed him wherever he led, lovingly and sociably. Nevertheless, they returned to the high road, and pursued it at a venture without any other aim. As they went along, then, in this way, Sancho said to his master, Signor, would your worship give me leave to speak a little to you? For since you laid that hard injunction of silence on me, several things have gone to rot in my stomach, and I have now just one on the tip of my tongue that I don't want to be spoiled.
Say on, Sancho, said Don Quixote, and be brief in thy discourse, for there is no pleasure in one that is long.
Well then, Signor, returned Sancho, I say that for some days past I have been considering how little is got or gained by going in search of these adventures that your worship seeks in these wilds and crossroads, where, even if the most perilous are victoriously achieved, there is no one to see or know of them, and so they must be left untold forever. To the loss of your worship's object, and the credit they deserve. Therefore, it seems to me it would be better, saving your worship's better judgment, if we were to go and serve some emperor, or other great prince, who may have some war on hand, in whose service your worship may prove the worth of your person, your great might, and greater understanding, on perceiving which the Lord, in whose service we may be, will perforce have to reward us. Each according to his merits. And there you will not be at a loss for someone to set down your achievements in writing so as to preserve their memory forever. Of my own I say nothing, as they will not go beyond squirely limits, though I make bold to say that if it be the practice in chivalry to write the achievements of squires, I think mine must not be left out.
Thou speakest not amiss, Sancho, answered Don Quixote, but before that point is reached, it is requisite to roam the world, as it were on probation, seeking adventures in order that by achieving some, name and fame may be acquired, such that when he betakes himself to the court of some great monarch, the knight may be already known by his deeds, and that the boys, the instant they see him enter the gate of the city, may all follow him around and surround him, crying, "This is the Knight of the Sun, or the Serpent, or any other title under which he may have achieved great deeds. This, they will say, is he who vanquished in single combat the gigantic Bruno of mighty strength, he who delivered the great Mameluke of Persia out of the long enchantment under which he had been for almost 900 years. So from one to another they will go proclaiming his achievements, and presently at the tumult of the boys and the others the king of that kingdom will appear at the windows of his royal palace, and as soon as he beholds the knight, recognizing him by his arms and the device on his shield, he will, as a matter of course, say, "What ho! Forth all ye, the knights of my court, to receive the flower of chivalry who cometh hither." At which command all will issue forth, and he himself, advancing halfway down the stairs, will embrace him closely and salute him, kissing him on the cheek, and will then lead him to the queen's chamber, where the knight will find her with the princess, her daughter, who will be the one of the most beautiful and accomplished damsels that could with the utmost pains be discovered anywhere in the known world. Straightway it will come to pass that she will fix her eyes upon the knight, and he upon her, and each will seem to the other something more divine than human, and without knowing how or why they will be taken and entangled in the inextricable toils of love, and, sorely distressed in heart, not to see any way of making their pains and sufferings known by speech, thence they will lead him, no doubt, to some richly adorned chamber of the palace, where, having removed his armour, they will bring him a rich mantle of scarlet, whenceforth to robe himself, and if he look noble in his armour, he will look still more so in a doublet. When night comes, he will sup with the king, queen, and princess, and all the time he will never take his eyes off her, stealing stealthy glances unnoticed by those present, and she will do the same, and with equal cautiousness, being, as I have said, a damsel of great discretion. The tables being removed, suddenly through the door of the hall there will enter a hideous and diminutive dwarf, followed by a fair dame, between two giants, who comes with a certain adventure, the work of an ancient sage, and he who shall achieve it shall be deemed the best knight in the world. Okay. This story keeps going on for an entirely another page. I need a breath. Hold on. Bear with me, Don Quixote. Your imagination is too much for me. I'm waving the white flag here. Let me take a drink. This man's tangents are legendary. The king will then command all those present to essay it, and none will bring it to an end and conclusion save the stranger knight, to the great enhancement of his fame, whereat the princess will be overjoyed and will esteem herself happy and fortunate in having fixed and placed her thoughts so high. And the best of it is that this king or prince or whatever he is engaged in a very bitter war with another as powerful as himself, and the stranger knight, after having been some days at his court, requests leave from him to go and serve him in the said war. The king will grant it very readily, and the knight will courteously kiss his hands for the favour done to him, and that night he will take leave of his lady the princess at the grating of the chamber where she sleeps, which looks upon a garden, and at which he has already been many times conversed with her, the go-between and confidant in the matter being a damsel much trusted by the princess. He will sigh, she will swoon, the damsel will fetch water, much distressed because morning approaches, and for the honour of her lady he would not that they were discovered. At last, the princess will come to herself, and will present her white hands through the grating to the knight, who will kiss them 1,000 times, bathing them with his tears. It will be arranged between them how they are to inform each other of their good or evil fortunes, and the princess will entreat him to make his absence as short as possible, which he will promise to do with many oaths. Once more he kisses her hands, and takes his leave in such grief that he is well nigh ready to die. Sorry, I dropped a few frames there, making sure we're good. Okay. He betakes him thence to his chamber, flings himself on his bed, cannot sleep for sorrow at parting, rises early in the morning, goes to take the leave of the king and princess, and as he takes his leave of the pair, it is told him that the princess is indisposed, and cannot receive a visit. The knight thinks it is from grief at his departure, His heart is pierced, and he is hardly able to keep from showing his pain. The confidant is present, observes all, goes to tell her mistress, who listens with tears, and says that one of her greatest distresses is not knowing who this knight is, and whether he is of kingly lineage or not. The damsel assures her that so much courtesy, gentleness, and gallantry of bearing as her knight possesses could not exist in any save one who was royal and illustrious. Her anxiety is thus relieved, and she strives to be of good cheer, lest she should excite suspicion in her parents. And, at the end of 2 days, she appears in public. Meanwhile, the knight has taken his departure. He fights in the war, conquers the king's enemy, wins many cities, triumphs in many battles, returns to the court, sees his lady where he was wont to see her, and is agreed that he shall demand her in marriage of her parents as the reward of his services. The king is unwilling to give her, and as he knows not who he is, but nevertheless, whether carried off or in whatever other way it may be, the princess comes to be his bride, and her father comes to regard it as a very good fortune. For it so happens that this knight is proved to be the son of a valiant king of some kingdom, I know not what, for I fancy it is not likely to be on the map. The father dies, the princess inherits, and in 2 words, the knight becomes king. And here comes in at once the bestowal of rewards upon his squire, and all who have aided him in rising to so exalted a rank. He marries his squire to a damsel of the princess's, who will be, no doubt, the one who is confidant in their amour, and is daughter of a very great duke.
That's all. That's what I want, and no mistake about it, said Sancho. That's what I'm waiting for. For all this, word for word, is in store for your worship under the title of the Knight of the Rueful Countenance. That name.
Thou needst not doubt it, Sancho, replied Don Quixote, for in the same manner, and by the same steps I have described here, knights errant rise and have risen to be kings and emperors. All we want now is to find out what king, Christian or pagan, is at war and has a beautiful daughter. But there will be time enough to think of that, for as I have told thee, fame must be won in other quarters before repairing to the court. There is another thing, too, that is wanting, for supposing we find a king who is at war and has a beautiful daughter, and that I have won incredible fame throughout the universe, I know not how it can be made out that I am of royal lineage, or even second cousin to an emperor. For the king will not be willing to give me his daughter in marriage unless he is first thoroughly satisfied on this point. However much my famous deeds may deserve it.
Oh, dropping some frames again. Hang tight. Having a night of it already. Alright, I think we're back. We're not really dropping super hard, just having some dips. Okay.
So that by this deficiency I fear I shall lose what my arm has fairly earned. True it is I am a gentleman of known house, of estate and property, and entitled to the 500 sueldos mulet, and it may be that the sage who shall write my history will so clear up my ancestry and pedigree that I may find myself 5th or 6th in descent from a king, for I would have thee know, Sancho, that there are 2 kinds of lineage in this world. Some there be tracing and deriving their descent from kings and princes, whom time has reduced little by little until they end in a point like a pyramid upside down, and others who spring from the common herd and go on rising step by step until they come to be great lords, so that the difference is that the one were what they no longer are, and the others are what they formerly were not. And I may be of such that after investigation my origin may prove great and famous, with which the king, my father-in-law, that is to be, ought to be satisfied. And should he not be, the princess will so love me that even though she well knew me to be the son of a water-carrier, she will take me for her lord and husband in spite of her father. If not, then it comes to seizing her and carrying her off where I please, for time or death will put an end to the wrath of her parents.
It comes to this too, said Sancho, what some naughty people say, never ask as a favour what thou canst take by force. Though it would fit better to say, a clear escape is better than good men's prayers.
I say so because if my lord the king, your worship's father-in-law, will not condescend to give you my lady, the princess, there is nothing for it but, as your worship says, to seize her and transport her. But the mischief is that until peace is made, you come into the peaceful enjoyment of your kingdom, the poor squire is famishing as far as rewards go, unless it be that the confidant damsel that is to be his wife comes with the princess, and that with her he tides over his bad luck until heaven otherwise orders things. For his master, I suppose, may as well give her to him at once for a lawful wife. Nobody can object to that, said Don Quixote. Then, since that may be, said Sancho, there is nothing for it but to commend ourselves to God, and let fortune take what course it will. God guide it according to my wishes and thy wants, said Don Quixote, and mean be he who thinks himself mean. In God's name let him be so, said Sancho. I am an old Christian, and to fit me for account, that's enough. And more than enough for thee, said Don Quixote, and even wert thou not, it would make no difference, because I, being the king, can easily give thee nobility without purchase or service rendered by thee. For when I make the account, then thou art at once a gentleman, and they may say that what they will, but by my faith they will have to call thee your lordship, whether they like it or not. Not a doubt of it, and I'll know how to support the title, said Sancho. Title thou shouldst say, not tittle. Oh, yeah, said his master. So be it, answered Sancho. I say, I will know how to behave, for once in my life I was a beadle of a brotherhood, and the beadle's gown sat so well on me that all said I looked as if I was to be steward of the same brotherhood. What will it be, then, when I put on a duke's robe on my back, or dress myself in gold and pearls like a count? I believe they'll come 100 leagues to see me. Thou wilt look well, said Don Quixote, but thou must shave thy beard often, for thou hast it so thick and rough and unkempt that if thou dost not shave it every second day at least, they will see what thou art at the distance of a musket shot. What more will it be, said Sancho, than having a barber and keeping him at wages in the house? And even if it be necessary, I will make him go behind me like a nobleman's equerry. Why, how dost thou know that noblemen have equerries behind them? Asked Don Quixote. I will tell you, answered Sancho. Years ago I was for a month at the capital, and there I saw, taking the air, a very small gentleman, who they said was a very great man, and a man following him on horseback at every turn he took, just as if he was his tail. I asked why this man did not join the other man, instead of always going behind him. They answered me that he was his equerry, and that it was the custom with nobles to have such persons behind them, and ever since then I know it, for I have never forgotten it. Thou art right, said Don Quixote, and in the same way thou mayst carry thy barber with thee, for customs did not come into use altogether, nor were they all invented at once, and thou mayst be the first count to have a barber to follow him, and indeed shaving one's beard is a greater trust than saddling one's horse. Let the barber business be my lookout, said Sancho, and your worships be it to strive to become a king, and make me a count. So it shall be, answered Don Quixote. Raising his eyes, he saw what will be told in the following chapter. Don Quixote telling his story over his plundered crown. Man, had so much yap. That was... We think, like, getting lost in delusion is one thing. This was next level. I mean, that's the whole premise of this book, is the entire book is him being lost in delusion, but this was like, wow!
Yeah, this is, whew. It strains the sight reading to go, because it's like switching between topics and running through it, and so, because you have to imagine, he's just rattling this off. Just, not a hesitation, just boom, 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 boom. So, I'm trying my best to keep up with the imagined pace, and man, he goes wild. Alright, so, let's continue with chapter 22 of the freedom Don Quixote conferred on several unfortunates who, against their will, were being carried where they had no wish to go. Oh no. Don Quixote is about to free some felons. Liberate a chain gang? Yeah, that sounds about right. Cid Hamete Benengeli, the Arab and Manjican author, relates in this most grave, high-sounding, minute, delightful, and original history that after the discussion between the famous Don Quixote of La Mancha and his squire, Sancho Panza, which is set down at the end of chapter 21, Don Quixote raised his eyes and saw coming along the road he was following some dozen men on foot, strung together by the neck, like beads on a great iron chain, and all with manacles on their hands. With them there came also 2 men on horseback, and 2 on foot, those on horseback with wheel-lock muskets, those on foot with javelins and swords. And as soon as Sancho saw them, he said, "It is a chain of galley slaves on the way to the galleys by force of the king's orders."
How by force? Asked Don Quixote. Is it possible that the king uses force against anyone?
I do not say that, answered Sancho, but that these people are condemned for their crimes to serve by force in the king's galleys.
In fact, replied Don Quixote, however it may be, these people are going where they are taking them by force, and not of their own will.
Just so, said Sancho.
Then if so, said Don Quixote, here is a case for the exercise of my office, to put down force, and to succor and help the wretched.
Recollect, your worship, said Sancho, justice, which is the king himself, is not using force or doing wrong to such persons, but punishing them for their crimes. The chain of galley slaves had by this time come up, and Don Quixote, in very courteous language, asked those who were in custody of it to be good enough to tell him the reason, or reasons, for which they were conducting these people in this manner. One of the guards on horseback answered that they were galley slaves, belonging to his majesty, that they were going to the galleys, and that was all that was to be said, and all he had any business to know.
Nevertheless, replied Don Quixote, I should like to know from each of them separately the reason for his misfortune.
To this he added more to the same effect to induce them to tell him what he wanted so civilly that the other mounted guards said to him, "Though we have here the register and certificate of the sentence of every one of these wretches, this is no time to take them out or read them. Come and ask themselves. They can tell if they choose, and they will, for these fellows take a pleasure in doing and talking about rascalities." With this permission, which Don Quixote would have taken even had they not granted it, he approached the chain and asked the first for what offences he was now in such a sorry case. He made answer that it was for being a lover.
"For that only?" replied Don Quixote. "Why, if for being lovers they send people to the galleys, I might have been rowing in the mate long ago." "The love is not the sort your worship is thinking of," said the galley slave. "Mine was that I loved a washerwoman's basket of clean linen so well, and held it so close in my embrace, that if the arm of the law had not forced it from me, I should never have let it go of my own will to this moment. I was caught in the act. There was no occasion for torture, the case was settled. They treated me to 100 lashes on the back and 3 years of grapples besides, and that was the end of it.
What are grapples? Asked Don Quixote.
Grapples are galleys,
answered the galley slave, who was a young man of about 24, and said he was a native of Pietrita. Don Quixote asked the same question of the second, who made no reply, so downcast and melancholy was he. But the first answered for him and said,
He, sir, goes as a canary. I mean, as a musician and a singer.
What? Said Don Quixote. For being musicians and singers are people sent to the galleys too?
Yes, sir, answered the galley slave, for there is nothing worse than singing under suffering.
On the contrary, I have heard say, said Don Quixote, that he who sings scares away his woes.
Here it is the reverse, said the galley slave, for he who sings once weeps all his life.
I do not understand it, said Don Quixote. Well, one of the guards said to him, Sir, to sing under suffering means with the non-sancta fraternity, to confess under torture. They put this sinner to the torture, and he confessed his crime, which was being a cuatrero, that is, a cattle stealer. And on his confession they sentenced him to 6 years in the galleys, besides 200 lashes that he has already had on the back. And he is always dejected and downcast because the other 2 thieves that were left behind, and that march here, ill-treat and snub and jeer and despise him for confessing, and not having spirit enough to say nay, for say they nay has no more letters in it than yea, and a culprit is well off when life or death with him depends on his own tongue, and not on that of a witness or evidence. And to my thinking, they are not very far out.
And I think so too, answered Don Quixote.
Then passing on to the third, he asked him what he had asked the others. And the man answered very readily and unconcernedly, I am going for 5 years to their ladyships the Garapas, for the want of 10 ducats.
I will give 20 with pleasure to get you out of that trouble, said Don Quixote.
That, said the galley slave, is like a man having money at sea when he is dying of hunger, and has no way of buying what he wants. I say so because if at the right time I had had those 20 ducats that your worship now offers me, I would have greased the notary's pen and freshened up the attorney's wits with them, so that today I should be in the middle of a plaza at the Zocodover at Toledo, and not on this road coupled like a greyhound. But God is great. Patience. There, that's enough of it. Don Quixote passed on to the fourth, a man of venerable aspect, with a white beard falling below his breast, who, on hearing himself, asked the reason of his being there, began to weep without answering a word. But the fifth acted as his tongue and said, This worthy man is going to the galleys for 4 years, after having gone the rounds in ceremony and on horseback.
That means, said Sancho Panza, as I take it, you have been exposed to shame in public.
Just so, replied the galley slave, and the offence for which they gave him that punishment was having been an ear-broker, nay, body-broker. I mean, in short, that this gentleman goes as a pimp, and for having besides a certain touch of the sorcerer about him.
If that touch had not been thrown in, said Don Quixote, he would not deserve, for mere pimping, to row in the galleys, but rather to command and be admirable of them. For the office of pimp is no ordinary one, being the office of persons of discretion, one very necessary in a well-ordered state, and only to be exercised by persons of good birth. Nay, there ought to be an inspector and overseer of them, as in other offices, and recognized number, as with the brokers on 'change. In this way, many of the evils will be avoided which are caused by this office and calling being in the hands of stupid and ignorant people, such as women more or less silly, and pages and jesters of little standing and experience, who on the most urgent occasions, and when ingenuity of contrivance is needed, let the crumbs freeze on the way to their mouths, and know not which is their right hand. I should like to go farther, and give reasons to show that it is advisable to choose those who are to hold so necessary an office in the state, but this is not the fit place for it. Some day I will expound the matter to someone able to see to and rectify it. All I say now is that the additional fact of his being a sorcerer has removed the sorrow it gave to me to see these white hairs and its venerable countenance in so painful a position on account of his being a pimp. Though I know well there are no sorceries in the world that can move or compel the will of some simple folk fancy, for our will is free, nor is there herb or charm that can force it. All that certain silly women and quacks do is to turn men mad with potions and poisons, pretending that they have the power to cause love, for, as I say, it is an impossibility to compel the will. I did not expect Don Quixote to be so sex positive. Having Don Quixote of all people be like, you know what? Sex work is work. It should be on the up and up, all clear and handled in an upright fashion, and it's, that's good. I'm like, that was a surprise. A man both ahead of his time and behind the times, considering he finds himself thinking that he's in medieval times while not quite. But, he can be his own anachronism and paroxysm all at once. Ooh. It is true, said the good old man. And indeed, sir, as far as the charge of sorcery goes, I was not guilty. As to that of being a pimp, I cannot deny it, but I never thought I was doing any harm by it. For my only object was that all the world should enjoy itself and live in peace and quiet, without quarrels or troubles. But my good intentions were unavailing to save me from going where I never expect to come back from, with this weight of years upon me and urinary ailments that never gives me a moment's ease. And again he fell to weeping as before, and such compassion did Sancho feel for him that he took out a real of 4 from his bosom and gave it to him in alms. Don Quixote went on and asked another what his crime was, and the man answered with no less but rather much more sprightliness than the last one. I am here because I carried the joke too far with a couple of cousins of mine, and with a couple of other cousins who were none of mine. In short, I carried the joke so far with them all that it ended in such a complicated increase of kindred that no accountant could make it clear. It was all proved against me. I got no favor. I had no money. I was near having my neck stretched. They sentenced me to the galleys for 6 years. I accepted my fate. It is the punishment of my fault. I am a young man. Let life only last, and with that all will come right. If you, sir, have anything wherewith to help the poor, God will repay it to you in heaven, and we on earth will take care in our petitions to pray to him to pray for the life and health of your worship, that they may be as long and as good as your amiable appearance deserves. This one was in the dress of a student, and one of the guards said that he was a great talker and a very elegant Latin scholar. Behind all these, there came a man of 30, a very personable fellow, except that when he looked, his eyes turned in a little towards one the other. He was bound differently from the rest, for he had to his leg a chain so long it was wound all round his body, and 2 rings on his neck, one attached to the chain, the other to what they call a keep friend, or friend's foot, from which hung 2 irons, reaching to his waist, with 2 manacles fixed to them, in which his hands were secured by a big padlock, so that he could neither raise his hands to his mouth nor lower his head to his hands. Don Quixote asked why this man carried so many more chains than the others. The guard replied that it was because he alone had committed more crimes than all the rest put together. And he was so daring and such a villain that though they marched him in that fashion, they did not feel sure of him, but were in dread of his making his escape. What crimes can he have committed, said Don Quixote, if they have not deserved a heavier punishment than being sent to the galleys? He goes for 10 years, replied the guard, which is the same thing as a civil death, and all that need be said is that this good fellow is the famous Jean de Passamont, otherwise called Ginesilio de Parapilla. Gently, Signor Commissary, said the galley slave at this. Let us have no fixing of names or surnames. My name is Jeans, not Ginesillo, and my family name is Pasamont, not Parapilla, as you say. Let each one mind his own business. He will be doing enough. Speak with less impertinence, master thief of extra measure, replied the commissary, if you don't want me to make you hold your tongue in spite of your teeth. It's easy to see, returned the galley slave, that a man goes as God pleases, but someone shall know some day whether I am called Ginesillo de Parapilla or not. Don't they call you so, liar? Said the guard. They do, returned Jean. But I will make them give over calling me so, or I will be shaved, where I only say behind my teeth. If you, sir, have anything to give us, give it to us at once, and God speed you, for you are becoming tiresome with all this inquisitiveness about the lives of others. If you want to know about mine, let me tell you, I am Jean de Passamont, whose life is written by these fingers. He says true, said the commissary, for he has himself written his story as grand as you please, and has left the book in the prison in pawn for 200 reals. And I mean to take it out of pawn, said Jean, though it were in for 200 ducats. Is it so good, said Don Quixote. So good it is it, replied Jean, that a fig for Lazarillo de Torme, and all that kind that has been written, or shall be written compared with it, all I will say about it is that it deals with facts, and facts so neat and diverting that no lies could match them. And how is the book entitled? Asked Don Quixote. The Life of Jean de Passamont, replied the subject of it. And is it finished? Asked Don Quixote. How can it be finished? Said the other, when my life is not yet finished. All that is written is from my birth down to the point when they sent me to the galleys this last time. Then you've been there before, said Don Quixote. In the service of God and the king, I have been there for 4 years before now, and I know by this time what the biscuit and courage are like, replied Jean, and it is no great grievance to me to go back to them, for there I shall have time to finish my book. I have still many things left to say, and in the galleys of Spain there is more than enough leisure, though I do not want much for what I have to write, for I have it by heart. You seem a clever fellow, said Don Quixote. And an unfortunate one, replied Jean. Jeez, Pete. For misfortune always persecutes good wit. It persecutes rogues, said the commissary. I told you already to go gently, Master Commissary, said the Passamont. Their lordships yonder never gave you that staff to ill-treat us wretches here, but to conduct us and take us where his majesty orders you. If not, by the life of... Never mind. Maybe that someday the stains made in the inn will come out in the scouring. Let everyone hold his tongue and behave well and speak better. And now let us march on. We have had quite enough of this entertainment. The commissary lifted his staff to strike Passamont in return for his threats, but Don Quixote came between them, and begged him not to ill-use him, as it was not too much to allow one who had his hands tied to have his tongue trifle free. And turning to the whole chain of them, he said, From all you have told me, dear brethren, I make out clearly that though they have punished you for your faults, the punishments you are about to endure do not give you much pleasure, and that you go to them very much against the grain and against your will, and that perhaps this one's want of courage under torture, that one's want of money, the other's want of advocacy, and lastly the perverted judgment of the judge may have been the cause of your ruin, and of your failure to obtain the justice you had on your side. All which presents itself now to my mind, urging, persuading, and even compelling me to demonstrate in your case the purpose for which heaven sent me into the world, and caused me to make profession of the order of chivalry to which I belong, and the vow I took therein to give aid to those in need and under the oppression of the strong. But I know that it is the mark of prudence not to do by foul means what may be done by fair. I will ask these gentlemen, the guards and commissary, to be so good as to release you and let you go in peace, as there will be no lack of others to serve the king under more favorable circumstances. For it seems to me a hard case to make slaves of those whom God and nature have made free. Moreover, sirs of the guard, added Don Quixote, these poor fellows have done nothing to you. Let each answer for his own sins yonder. There is a God in heaven who will not forget to punish the wicked or reward the good. And it is not fitting that honest men should be the instruments of punishment to others, they being therein no way concerned. This request I make thus gently and quietly, that, if you comply with it, I may have reason for thanking you, and, if you will not voluntarily, this lance and sword, together with the might of my arm, shall compel you to comply with it by force. Nice nonsense, said the commissary. A fine piece of pleasantry he has come out with, at last. He wants us to let the king's prisoners go. As if we had any authority to release them, or he to order us to do so. Go your way, sir, and good luck to you. Put that basin straight that you've got on your head, and don't go looking for 3 feet on a cat. 'Tis you that are a cat, rat, and rascal, replied Don Quixote, and acting on the word, he fell upon him so suddenly that without giving him time to defend himself, he brought him to the ground sorely wounded with a lance thrust. And lucky it was for him that it was the one that had the musket. The other guards stood thunderstruck and amazed at this unexpected event, but recovering presence of mind, those on horseback seized their swords, and those on foot their javelins, and attacked Don Quixote, who was waiting for them with great calmness. And no doubt it would have gone badly with him if the galley slaves, seeing the chance before them of liberating themselves, had not effected it by contriving to break the chain on which they were strung. Such was the confusion that the guards, now rushing at the galley slaves who were breaking loose, now to attack Don Quixote, who was waiting for them, did nothing at all that was of any use. Sancho, on his part, gave a helping hand to release Jean de Passamont, who was the first to leap forth upon the plain free and unfettered, and who, attacking the prostrate commissary, took from him his sword and the musket, with which, aiming at one and leveling the other, he, without ever discharging it, drove every one of the guards off the field, for they took to flight. As well to escape Passamont's musket as the showers of stone the now released galley slaves were raining upon them. Sancho was greatly grieved at the affair, because he anticipated that those who had fled would report the matter to the Holy Brotherhood, who, at the summons of the alarm bell, would at once sally forth in quest of the offenders. And he said so to his master, and entreated him to leave the place at once, and go into hiding in the sierra that was close by. That is all very well, said Don Quixote, but I know what must be done now. And calling together all the galley slaves, who were running riot, and had stripped the commissary to the skin, he collected them round him to hear what he had to say, and addressed them as follows. To be grateful for benefits received is the part of persons of good birth, and one of the sins most offensive to God is ingratitude. I say so because, sirs, ye have already been seen by manifest proof the benefit ye have received of me, in return for which I desire, and it is my good pleasure that, laden with that chain which I have taken off your necks, ye at once set out and proceed to the city of El Toboso, and there present yourselves before the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso, and say to her that her knight, he of the rueful countenance, sends to commend himself to her, and that ye recount to her in full detail all the particulars of this notable adventure, up to the recovery of your longed-for liberty, and this done, ye may go where ye will, and good fortune attend you. Jean de Passamont made answer for all, saying, That which you, sir, our deliverer, demand of us, is of all the impossibilities the most impossible to comply with, because we cannot go together along the roads, but only singly and separate, and each one his own way, endeavoring to hide ourselves in the bowels of the earth to escape the Holy Brotherhood, which no doubt will come out in search of us. What your worship may do, and fairly do, is to change this service and tribute as regards the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso for a certain quantity of Ave Marias and Credos, which we will say for your worship's intention. And this is a condition that can be complied with by night as by day, running or resting, in peace or in war. But to imagine that we are going now to return to the flesh pots of Egypt, I mean to take up your chain, and set out for El Toboso, is to imagine that it is now night, though it is not yet 10 in the morning, and to ask this of us is like asking pears of the elm tree. Ooh. Sorry, it's starting to hit me a little bit there. Then, by all that's good, said Don Quixote, now stirred to wrath. Don, son of a bitch, Don Genesilio de Paropido, or whatever your name is, you will have to go yourself alone, with your tail between your legs and the whole chain on your back. Passamont, who was anything but meek, being by this time thoroughly convinced that Don Quixote was not quite right in his head, as he had committed such a vagary as to set them free, finding himself abused in this fashion, gave the wink to his companions, and falling back they began to shower stones on Don Quixote, at such a rate that he was quite unable to protect himself with his buckler, and poor Rocinante no more heeded the spur than if he had been made of brass. Sancho planted himself behind his ass, and with him sheltered himself from the hailstorm that poured on both of them. Don Quixote was unable to shield himself so well, but that more pebbles than I could count struck him full on the body, with such force that they brought him to the ground. And the instant he fell, the student pounced on him, snatched the basin from his head, and with it struck 3 or 4 blows on his shoulders, and as many more on the ground, knocking it almost to pieces. They then stripped him of a jacket that he wore over his armor, and they would have stripped off his stockings if his greaves had not prevented them. From Sancho they took his coat, leaving him in his shirt sleeves, and dividing among themselves the remaining spoils of the battle, they went each one on his way, more solicitous about keeping clear of the Holy Brotherhood they dreaded, than about burdening themselves with the chain, or going to present themselves before the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso. The ass and Rocinante, Sancho and Don Quixote were all that were left upon the spot. The ass, with drooping head, serious, shaking his ears from time to time as if he thought the storm of stones that assailed them was not yet over. Rocinante stretched beside his master, for he too had been brought to the ground by a stone. Sancho, stripped and trembling with fear of the Holy Brotherhood, and Don Quixote, fuming to find himself so served by the very persons for whom he had done so much. Yep, this is what comes of another of the misadventures, to be so soundly trounced. Alright, we are a little bit past 9, so let's go ahead and take a short break. I'll get a fresh drink, probably another Ricola, and we will see how much further we get when we return. Be back in just a few minutes. Thanks, guys.
Alright, we are back. Well, this is hitting me a little bit harder than I had expected. I'm not quite as recovered as I'd hoped, but we'll see if we can get through probably one more chapter tonight. This next one is a long one, so we won't be too far under quota. Jeez. Yeah, that's... I guess if you go a few days without saying more than 3 words, all of a sudden doing a narration, kind of a stress, kind of a surprise sometimes. Exactly. Hopefully I should be able to get over the last of this in the next couple of days. So, let's try and get through one more tonight. Before it gets too much worse. Alright, so, Chapter 23 of What Befell Don Quixote in the Sierra Morena, which was one of the rarest adventures related in this voracious history. Seeing himself served in this way, Don Quixote said to his squire, "I have always heard it said, Sancho, that to do good to boors is to throw water into the sea. If I had believed thy words, I should have avoided this trouble. But it is done now. It is only to have patience and take warning for the future." "Your worship will take warning as much as I am a Turk," returned Sancho. Yeah, Sancho has good tsukomis. "But, as you say, this mischief might have been avoided if you had believed me. Believe me now, and a still greater one will be avoided. For I tell you, chivalry is of no account with the Holy Brotherhood, and they don't care 2 maravedis for all the knights errant in the world. And I can tell you, I fancy I hear their arrows whistling past my ears this minute."
"Thou art a coward by nature, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "but lest thou should say I am obstinate, and that I never do as thou dost advise. This once, I will take thy advice, and withdraw out of reach of that fury thou so dreadest. But it must be on one condition, that never, in life or death, thou art to say to anyone that I retired or withdrew from this danger out of fear, but only in compliance with thy entreaties. For if thou sayest otherwise, thou wilt lie therein, and from this time to that, and from that to this, I give thee lie, and say thou liest, and wilt lie every time thou thinkest or sayest it, and answer me not again. For at the mere thought that I am withdrawing or retiring from any danger, above all from this, which does seem to carry some little shadow of fear with it, I am ready to take my stand here and await alone. Not only that the Holy Brotherhood you talk of and dread, but the brothers of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the 7 Maccabees and Castor and Pollux, and all the brothers and brotherhoods in the world."
"Signor," replied Sancho, "to retire is not to flee, and there is no wisdom in waiting when danger outweighs hope, and it is the part of wise men to preserve themselves today for tomorrow, and not risk all in one day. And let me tell you, though I am a clown and a bull, I have got some notion of what they call safe conduct. So repent not of having taken my advice, but mount Rocinante if you can, and if not, I will help you, and follow me, for my mother tells me we have more need of legs than hands just now." Don Quixote mounted without replying, and Sancho leading the way on his ass. They entered the side of the Sierra Morena, which was close by, as it was Sancho's design to cross it entirely and come out again at El Viso or Olmo del Campo, and hide for some days among its crags, so as to escape the search of the Brotherhood, should they come to look for them. He was encouraged in this by perceiving that the stock of provisions carried by the ass had come safe out of the fray with the galley slaves, a circumstance that he regarded as a miracle, seeing how they pillaged and ransacked. That night they reached the very heart of the Sierra Morena, where it seemed prudent to Sancho to pass the night and even some days, at least as many as the stores he carried might last. And so they encamped between two rocks and among some cork trees. But fatal destiny, which, according to the opinion of those who have not the light of the true faith, directs, arranges, and settles everything in its own way, so ordered it that Jean de Passamont, the famous knave and thief who, by the virtue and madness of Don Quixote, had been released from the chain, driven by fear of the Holy Brotherhood, which he had good reason to dread, resolved to take hiding in the mountains, and his fate and fear led him to the same spot to which Don Quixote and Sancho Panza had been led by theirs, just in time to recognize them and leave them to fall asleep. And as the wicked are always ungrateful, and necessity leads to evil doing, and immediate advantage overcomes all considerations of the future, Jean, who was neither grateful nor well-principled, made up his mind to steal Sancho Panza's ass, not troubling himself about Rocinante, as being a prize that was no good either to pledge or sell. While Sancho slept, he stole his ass, and before day dawned, he was far out of reach. No, the ass! Aurora made her appearance, bringing gladness to the earth, but sadness to Sancho Panza, for he found that his Dapple was missing. I mean, even with context. And seeing himself bereft of him, he began the saddest and most doleful lament in the world. So loud that Don Quixote awoke at his exclamations and heard him saying, "Oh, son of my bowels, born in my very house, my children's plaything, my wife's joy, the envy of my neighbours, relief of my burdens, and lastly, half supporter of myself, for with the 26 and 20 maravedis thou didst earn me daily, I am at half my charges." Oh, that was all. I think that was... Oh, that was all Pancho. Or Sancho. Don Quixote, when he heard the lament and learned the cause, consoled Sancho with the best arguments he could, entreating him to be patient, and promising to give him a letter of exchange, ordering 3 out of 5 ass colts that he had at home to be given to him. Sancho took comfort at this, dried his tears, suppressed his sobs, and returned thanks for the kindness shown him by Don Quixote. He, on his part, was rejoiced to the heart on entering the mountains, as they seemed to him to be just the place for the adventures he was in quest of. They brought back to his memory the marvelous adventures that had befallen knights errant in the solitudes and wilds, and he went along reflecting on these things, so absorbed and carried away by them that he had no thought for anything else. Nor had Sancho any other care, now that he fancied he was traveling in a safe quarter, than to satisfy his appetite with such remains as were left of the clerical spoils. And so he marched behind his master, laden with what Dapple used to carry, emptying the sack and packing his paunch. And so long as he could go that way, he would not have given a farthing to meet with another adventure. While so engaged, he raised his eyes and saw that his master had halted, and was trying with the point of his pike to lift some bulky object that lay upon the ground, on which he hastened to join him and help him if it were needful, and reached him just as with the point of the pike he was raising a saddle pad with a valise attached to it, half or rather wholly rotten and torn, but so heavy were they that Sancho had to help to take them up, and his master directed him to see what the valise contained. Sancho did so with great alacrity, and though the valise was secured by a chain and a padlock, from its torn and rotten condition he was able to see its content, which were 4 shirts of fine Holland, and other articles of linen, no less curious than clean, and in a handkerchief he found a good lot of gold crowns, and as soon as he saw them he exclaimed, "Blessed be all heaven for sending us an adventure that is good for something." Searching further, he found a little memorandum book, richly bound. This Don Quixote asked of him, telling him to take the money and keep it for himself. Sancho kissed his hands for the favor, and cleared the valise of its linen, which he stowed away in the provision sack. Considering the whole matter, Don Quixote observed,
"It seems to me, Sancho, and it is impossible it can be otherwise, that some strayed traveller must have crossed the Sierra and been attacked and slain by footpads, who brought him to this remote spot to bury him."
"That cannot be," answered Sancho, "because if they had been robbers, they would not have left this money."
"Thou art right," said Don Quixote, "and I cannot guess or explain what this may mean. But stay, let us see if in this memorandum book there is anything written by which we may be able to trace out or discover what we want to know."
He opened it, and the first thing he found in it, written roughly but in a very good hand, was a sonnet, and reading it aloud that Sancho might hear it, he found that it ran as follows. Sonnet. Or love is lacking in intelligence, or to the height of cruelty attains, or else it is my doom to suffer pains, beyond the measure due my offence. But if love be a god, it follows thence, that he knows all, and certain it remains, no god loves cruelty, than who ordains this penance that enthralls while it torments. It were a falsehood, Chloe, thee to name, such evil with such goodness cannot live, and against heaven I dare not charge the blame. I only know it is my fate to die. To him who knows not whence his malady, a miracle alone a cure can give. "There is nothing to be learned from that rhyme," said Sancho, "unless by that clue there's in it one may draw out the ball of the whole matter."
"What clue is there?"
said Don Quixote. "I thought your worship spoke of a clue in it," said Sancho.
"I said only Chloe,"
said Don Quixote.
"and that, no doubt, is the name of the lady of whom the author of the sonnet complains. And, faith, he must be a tolerable poet, or I know little of the craft."
"Then your worship understands rhyming too?"
"And better than thou thinkest," replied Don Quixote, "as thou shalt see when thou carriest a letter written in verse from beginning to end to my lady Dulcinea del Toboso. For I would have thee know, Sancho, that all, or most of the knights-errant in days of yore were great troubadours and great musicians. For both of these accomplishments, or more properly speaking gifts, are the peculiar properties of lovers-errant. True it is that the verses of the knights of old have more spirit than neatness in them."
"Read more, your worship," said Sancho, "and you will find something that will enlighten us."
Don Quixote turned the page and said, "This is prose, and seems to be a letter."
"A correspondence letter, senor?"
"From the beginning it seems to be a love letter,"
replied Don Quixote. "Then let your worship read it aloud," said Sancho, "for I am very fond of love letters."
"With all my heart," said Don Quixote.
And, reading it aloud as Sancho had requested of him, he found it ran thus. Thy false promise and my sure misfortune carry me to a place whence the news of my death will reach thy ears before the words of my complaint. Ungrateful one, thou hast rejected me for one more wealthy, but not more worthy. But if virtue were esteemed wealth, I should neither envy the fortunes of others, nor weep for misfortunes of my own. What thy beauty raised up, thy deeds have laid low. By it I believed thee to be an angel. By them I know thou art a woman. Peace be with thee, who hast sent war to me, and heaven grant that the deceit of thy husband be ever hidden from thee, so that thou repent not of what thou hast done, and I reap not a revenge I would not have. When he had finished the letter, Don Quixote said,
There is less to be gathered from this than from the verses, except that he who wrote it is some rejected lover.
And turning over nearly all the pages of the book, he found more verses and letters, some of which he could read, while others he could not. But they were all made up of complaints, laments, misgivings, desires and aversions, favors and rejections, some rapturous, some doleful. While Don Quixote examined the book, Sancho examined the valise, not leaving a corner in the whole of it, or in the pad that he did not search, peer into, and explore, or seam that he did not rip, or tuft of wool that he did not pick to pieces, lest anything should escape for want of care and pains. So keen was the covetousness excited in him by the discovery of the crowns, which amounted to near 100, and though he found no more booty, he held the blanket flights, balsam vomits, steak benedictions, carriers' fisticuffs, missing alforjas, stolen coat, and all the hunger, thirst, and weariness he had endured in the service of his good master, cheap at a price, as he considered himself more than fully indemnified for all by the payment he received in the gift of the treasure trove. The Knight of the Rueful Countenance was still very anxious to find out who the owner of the valise could be, conjecturing from the sonnet and letter, from the money in gold, and from the fineness of the shirts, that he must be some lover of distinction, whom the scorn and cruelty of his lady had driven to some desperate course. But as in that uninhabited and rugged spot there was no one to be seen of whom he could inquire, he saw nothing else for it but to push on, taking whatever road Rocinante chose, which was where he could make his way, firmly persuaded that among these wilds he could not fail to meet some rare adventure. As he went along, then, occupied with these thoughts, he perceived on the summit of a height that rose before their eyes a man who went springing from rock to rock and from tussock to tussock with marvelous agility. As well as he could make out, he was unclad, with a thick black beard, long tangled hair, and bare legs and feet. His thighs were covered by breeches apparently of tawny velvet, but so ragged that they showed his skin in several places. He was bareheaded, and, notwithstanding the swiftness with which he passed, as has been described, the Knight of the Rueful Countenance observed and noted all these trifles, and though he made the attempt, he was unable to follow him, for it was not granted the feebleness of Rocinante to make way over such rough ground, he being, moreover, slow-paced and sluggish by nature. Don Quixote at once came to the conclusion that this was the owner of the saddle-pad and of the valise, and made up his mind to go in search of him, even though he should have to wander a year in those mountains before he found him. And so he directed Sancho to take a shortcut over one side of the mountain, while he himself went by the other, and perhaps by this means they might light upon this man who had passed so quickly out of their sight.
I could not do that, said Sancho, for when I separate from your worship, fear at once lays hold of me, and assails me with all sorts of panics and fancies. And let what I now say be a notice that from this time forth I am not going to stir a finger's width from your presence. It shall be so, said he of the Rueful Countenance, and I am very glad that thou art willing to rely on my courage, which will never fail thee, even though the soul in thy body fail thee. So come on now, behind me, slowly, as well as thou canst, and make lanterns of thine eyes. Let us make the circuit of this ridge. Perhaps we shall light upon this man that we saw, who no doubt is no other than the owner of what we found.
To which Sancho made answer, Far better would it be not to look for him, For if we find him, and he happens to be the owner of the money, it is plain I must restore it. It would be better, therefore, that, without taking this needless trouble, I should keep possession of it, until in some other less meddlesome and officious way the real owner may be discovered, and perhaps that will be when I shall have spent it, and then the king will hold me harmless.
Thou art wrong there, Sancho, said Don Quixote, for now that we have a suspicion who the owner is, and have him almost before us, we are bound to seek him and make restitution. And if we do not see him, the strong suspicion we have as to his being the owner makes us guilty, as if he was so. And so, friend Sancho, let not our search for him give thee any uneasiness, for if we find him, it will relieve mine.
And so saying, he gave Rocinante the spur, and Sancho followed him on foot and loaded. And after having partly made the circuit of the mountain, they found, lying in a ravine, dead and half devoured by dogs and pecked by jackdaws, a mule, saddled and bridled, all which still further strengthened their suspicion that he who had fled was the owner of the mule and the saddle pad. Well, at least it wasn't Sancho's mule. As they stood looking at it, they heard a whistle like that of a shepherd watching his flock. And suddenly, on their left, there appeared a great number of goats behind them on the summit of the mountain. The goatherd in charge of them, a man advanced in years. Don Quixote called aloud to him and begged him to come down to where they stood. He shouted in return, asking what had brought them to that spot, seldom or never trodden except by the feet of goats, or of the wolves and other wild beasts that roamed around. Sancho, in return, bade him come down, and they would explain all to him. The goatherd descended, and, reaching the place where Don Quixote stood, he said,
I will wager you're looking at that hack mule that lies dead in the hollow there, and faith, it has been lying there now these 6 months. Tell me, have you come upon its master about here? We have come upon nobody, answered Don Quixote, nor on anything, except a saddle pad and a little valise that we found not far from this. I found it too, said the goatherd, but I would not lift it nor go near it for some fear of some ill luck of being charged with theft. For the devil is crafty, and things rise up under one's feet to make one fall without knowing why or wherefore.
That's exactly what I say, said Sancho. I found it too. I would not go within a stone's throw of it, but there I left it. There it lies just as it was, for I don't want a dog with a bell.
Tell me, good man, said Don Quixote, do you know who is the owner of this property? All I can tell you, said the goatherd, is that about 6 months ago, more or less, there arrived at a shepherd's hut 3 leagues perhaps away from this, a youth of well-bred appearance and manners, mounted on that same mule which lies dead here, and with the same saddle pad and valise which you say you found and did not touch. He asked us what part of this Sierra was the most rugged and retired. We told him that it was where we now are, and so in truth it is. If you push on half a league farther, perhaps you will not be able to find your way out. And I am wondering how you managed to come here. There is no road or path that leads to this spot. I say then, but on hearing your answer, the youth turned about and made for the place we pointed out to him, leaving us all charmed with his good looks. And wondering at his question and the haste with which we saw him depart in the direction of the Sierra. And after that, we saw him no more, till some days afterwards he crossed the path of one of our shepherds, and without saying a word to him, came up to him and gave him several cuffs and kicks, and then turned to the ass with our provisions and took all the bread and cheese he carried, and having done this, made off again into the Sierra with extraordinary swiftness. When some of us goatherds learned this, we went in search of him for about 2 days through the most remote portion of the Sierra, at the end of which we found him lodged in the hollow of a large, thick cork tree. He came out to meet us with great gentleness, with his dress now torn and his face so disfigured and burned by the sun that we hardly recognized him, but that his clothes, though torn, convinced us, from the recollection we had of him, that he was the person we were looking for. He saluted us courteously, and in a few well-spoken words, he told us not to wonder at seeing him going about in this guise, as it was binding upon him, in order that he might work out a penance, which for his many sins had been imposed upon him. We asked him to tell us who he was, but he were never able to find out from him. We begged of him, too, when he was in want of food, which he could not do without, to tell us where we should find him, and we should bring it to him with all goodwill and readiness. Or if this were not to his taste, at least to come and ask it of us, not take it by force from the shepherds. He thanked us for the offer, begged pardon for the late assault, and promised for the future to ask it in God's name without offering violence to anybody. As for fixed abode, he said he had no other than that which chance offered wherever night might overtake him. His words ended in an outburst of weeping so bitter that we who listened to him must have been very stoned had we not joined him in it, comparing what we saw of him the first with what we saw now. For, as I saw, he was a graceful and gracious youth, and in his courteous and polished language showed himself to be of good birth and courtly breeding. And rustics as we were to listen to him, even to our rusticity, his gentle bearing sufficed to make it plain. But in the midst of his conversation, he stopped and became silent, keeping his eyes fixed upon the ground for some time, during which we stood still, waiting anxiously to see what would come of this abstraction, and with no little pity, from his behavior now staring at the ground with fixed gaze, his eyes wide open, without moving an eyelid again, closing them, compressing his lips and raising his eyebrows, we could perceive plainly a fit of madness of some kind had come upon him, and before long he showed that what we imagined was the truth. He arose in a fury from the ground where he had thrown himself and attacked the first he found near him with such rage and fierceness that if we had not dragged him off of him, he would have bitten or beaten him to death, all the while exclaiming, "O faithless Fernando, here shalt thou pay the penalty of the wrong thou hast done me. These hands shall tear out that heart of thine, abode and dwelling of all iniquity, but of deceit and fraud above all." And to these he added other words, all in effect of upbraiding this Fernando and charging him with treachery and faithlessness.
Amen. Bonk. That's the Twitch life. Gotta bonk somebody every once in a while.
We forced him to release his hold with no little difficulty, and without another word, he left us, and rushing off, plunged in among these brakes and brambles, so as to make it impossible for us to follow him. From this we suppose that madness comes upon him from time to time, and that someone called Fernando must have done him a wrong of a grievous nature, such the condition to which it had brought him seemed to show. All this has been since then confirmed on those occasions, and they have been many, on which he has crossed our path. At one time, to beg the shepherds to give him some of the food they carry, at another, to take it from them by force. For when there is a fit of madness upon him, even though the shepherds offer it freely, he will not accept it, but snatches it from them by dint of blows. But when he is in his senses, he begs for it for the love of God, courteously and civilly, and receives it with many thanks and not a few tears. And to tell you the truth, sirs, continued the goatherd, it was yesterday that we resolved, I and 4 lads, 2 of them our servants, and the other 2 friends of mine, to go in search of him until we find him. When we do, to take him, whether by force or of his own consent, to the town of Almodovar, which is 8 leagues from this, and there strive to cure him, if indeed his malady admits of a cure, or learn when he is in his senses who he is, and if he has relatives to whom we may give notice of his misfortune. This, sirs, is all I can say in answer to what you have asked me, and be sure that the owner of the articles you found is he whom you saw pass by with such nimbleness and so naked.
For Don Quixote had already described how he had seen a man go bounding along the mountainside, and he was now filled with amazement at what he heard from the goatherd, and more eager than ever to discover who the unhappy madman was. And in his heart he resolved, as he had done before, to search for him all over the mountain, not leaving a corner or cave unexamined until he found him. But chance arranged matters better than he expected or hoped, for at that very moment, in a gorge on the mountain that opened where they stood, the youth he wished to find made his appearance, coming along talking to himself in a way that would have been unintelligible near at hand, much more at a distance. His garb was what had been described, save that, as he drew near, Don Quixote perceived that a tattered doublet which he wore was amber-tanned, from which he concluded that one who wore such garments could not be of very low rank. Approaching them, the youth greeted them in a harsh and hoarse voice, but with great courtesy. Don Quixote returned his salutation with equal politeness, and, dismounting from Rocinante, advanced with well-bred bearing and grace to embrace him, and held him for some time close in his arms, as if he had known him for a long time. The other, whom we may call the ragged one of the sorry countenance, as Don Quixote was of the rueful, after submitting to the embrace, pushed him back a little, and, placing his hands on Don Quixote's shoulders, stood gazing at him, as if seeking to see whether he knew him, not less amazed, perhaps, at the sight of the face, figure, and armor of Don Quixote than Don Quixote was at the sight of him. To be brief, the first to speak after embracing was the ragged one, and he said what will be told farther on. Alright, guys. I am probably about at the limits here for tonight. Not quite as recovered as I would have liked. So let's go ahead and set a bookmark here and switch back to our other reading screen here. So, we've had plenty of adventures tonight. The jailbreak of the condemned, the further additions to Don Quixote's likely crimes that may or may not ever come to light. I have a feeling that if the authorities ever get hold of him, he's not getting away. Period. But now we've also seen a new character, a new creature, new coming up. So, we'll see how things will develop further on. We've got a couple days off until we come back on Friday for our regularly scheduled reading. We do have plans coming up for, let's see, the 31st is actually the 1-year anniversary of our channel on the YouTube side, and obviously not quite that long on Twitch, just by a small margin. But we are planning to do a bit of a longer reading on the 31st. That will be this coming Saturday. We will be doing an unarchived reading So it will be broadcast on Twitch and YouTube, but it will not have a VOD. By then I should be well enough recovered to have a solid stretch. So we'll be starting earlier and running later, but we will be reading The Fellowship of the Ring. As we have a chance to go outside of the public domain for these unarchived readings, I'm going to bring up an old favorite for a special occasion. So look forward to that. But before then, we have one more regularly scheduled reading where we will continue with Don Quixote on Friday. And then we will have our special on Saturday. And likely, we might have to skip on Sunday. The last time I did a marathon reading like this, I gave myself the next day because I think we did like, what, a 10-hour reading of the Andromeda Strain last time. That was a little much for me. So, as always, thank you for joining us. And those of you in YouTube, I implore you, give us a like on the stream, subscription to the channel. Those on Twitch, go ahead and give us a follow. We'll do what we can to grow our little community, have a little bit of a book club of our own, and we'll see what we have to go. Now, we will give it a try to do a raid again, if I can find someone that is relevant. Try and participate in this Twitch thing, and we'll see what we can do. So, let's see if we can find anybody that will have us. Let's see. Here's someone that's reading viewer stories. That could be fun. Nope. Unable to raid. Alright, let's try somebody else. This is the sadness of being a relatively fresh channel. It just takes some doing. Nope, not that one. No. We've had a successful raid, so we know it works in theory. It's just a matter of getting the right number of people around, I'm sure. Alright, I'm gonna try one more. We've had a few dings here. No. Alright. Well, it seems like it's just people are either have raids turned off, which is totally valid, especially for like reading stuff. You may not want the interruption, or they want bigger raids, which is also valid. So, we'll go ahead and call that a night here. I'll probably have to do some work on the backsides to see if we can get some regular people to raid into, rather than just trying to find strangers. Because finding strangers is fun, but maybe we can cultivate some sort of community. We'll see. Alright, as always, thank you very much for joining us. I will take the next couple days to rest up as best I can, so we can get back to a little bit of normalcy. Winter's rough on everybody. Alright, until next time, have a wonderful night, and thank you for joining us. Bye now.